So I grew up in a white Jewish family in apartheid South Africa, the home of Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu. And I saw very personally at an early age how systems can inflict great pain in people. I've spent much of my life thinking about systems and systems change, and not just technological change, but social change and scientific change, and really how they can be designed to enhance lives and do great good, but also can do great bad. So I don't need to tell this group of people that we live in a crazy time with technology speeding us up more and more, and we are more and more connected through social media. And this is most certainly a slide you've all seen a million times of Moore's Law, and how the doubling of processing power every 12 to 15 months for the last 50 years has unleashed these exponential and accelerating technologies. And while many of these breakthroughs are often used for good, they have also sped up our lives, hijacked our time, and sent us kicking and screaming into addictive social media behaviors. They've really changed the way we sleep, the way we eat, the way we play, the way we live, the way we exercise, and the way we connect to one another. And many of the consequences of these radical social behavior changes are still very much unknown, but what we are seeing across the world is an increase in suicide rates, increase in depression, and just the deterioration of our civil and civic discourse. And the deeper we get sucked into our virtual communities, the unhappier many of us become, and the less connected we often feel to each other, to our loved ones, and to our communities. And many of our big institutions are failing us as well, and many of our governments and systems are really not working in this radically changing world. And while we, and I say we because I'm included, the tech elite, we really pride ourselves and on our data, we refuse to acknowledge and measure the responsibility for the level of disruption we are creating and funding. And we really are driving this wedge between us and the rest of society. Technology is also unleashing things like technological unemployment. This is a company in China. Who knows DJ? The company DJ. Hands up, anybody? So DJ processes about 200,000 unique orders a day. It's sort of like the Amazon.com. Does anybody know how many employees DJ has? Shout out a number, anybody? Yeah, they have 4 employees. We're seeing increased inequality, so tech has raised our productivity level, but our salaries are often stagnant. We're also seeing an increase in cyber risk, more and more headlines like this every day in the newspaper. And we're seeing the undermining of
which
trust.
Our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, I don't know, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place, or how about this, simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. That's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. It may sound basic, but how we move forward in the age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of fucked up dystopia. Thank you. And stay woke, bitches.
So we also really have massive ethical challenges, which I know Divya and some other people are going to talk about later. But really, many of these challenges have to be dealt with on both a deeply local and a global level. And then finally, we have algorithm biases. Much of our data itself is deeply flawed, and these algorithms are reinforcing our systemic and historic biases and flaws. And as we heard earlier on, although it was from somebody who invested in Facebook, Facebook and Twitter and others have achieved market dominance by optimizing for this addiction, and their products and platforms continue to suck us in. They have also achieved dominance while automating many of their processes to remove a great deal of our human judgment. And they devise and hand us algorithms and put machines at the center of what we can and cannot do, what we do or don't experience, who we interact with, what we find important, and probably most disturbingly, what they think should make us happy. And these same technological behemoths have repeatedly been hacked by foreign countries, and we've allowed them undue influence on our governments, our elections, and democracy itself. We have experienced a loss of control of our lives and a loss of our independence and thought to technology. And while algorithms are not good or bad, they are just algorithms, and we can program them to represent our values and promote what is good and bad. What we are slowly coming to realize is that many of the tech companies we have all worshipped are not sophisticated enough to understand the impact of what they are doing for the long term and the consequences on humanity and our way of life, and therefore our ultimate happiness. But it's not just about technological change. There are all these vectors coming together: technological change, science change, geopolitical change, climate change. And so what I continue to ask myself is, what responsibility do we all have as we design the future technology unicorns of tomorrow to get ahead of some of these challenges and design systems that improve our quality of life and put humanity back at the center? So my work for the last 10 years has really been mainly focused on how we build systems, communities, and technologies for meaningful interactions, and what a profound impact that can have on all of our lives. And so, as Asha mentioned, I actually started working at TED about 12 years ago. I was hired to work on one of the TED Prizes, and the idea of the prize was a curated 4-hour block of the most impactful movies that were meant to somehow shift the planet's consciousness in some profound way. My job at the time was to get the whole planet to show up to watch the Super Bowl of filmmaking and find the money to do it. And so it was a big success. We had 5 major events on 5 continents, and I amassed about 3,000 communities around the world that showed up to watch this powerful block of moving film. And at the end of it, I think the profound experience and what I learned from it is this intersection of technology and community and how it can be a radically powerful thing. And so that summer, I was asked by the head of TED to stay on to try to figure out a way to take what was the small exclusive conference out into the world. I'd worked a lot in the technology sector. I was obsessed with the open source movement, and I loved the TED brand. And so I started thinking about how I could possibly apply some of the open source principles to this conference, this small exclusive conference. And I spent the summer working on it, thinking, well, you know, either we'd launch something or not, but it was very much an unknown. And at the end of the summer and early into the spring, we decided to launch this little experiment called TEDx. And the idea was a free license with a set of rules and guidelines, and this open source model of learning based on a global community of volunteers. In that first year, we saw about 250 small events that happened around the world. This year actually marks the 10-year anniversary of TEDx. And I think there are about 3,000 events that now happen on an annual basis. And it's estimated, because we don't know for sure, that about 50 million people have attended a TEDx event at one point or another. And so I managed this all with a team of 15 people, and we built what may be one of the largest global communities ever across race, religion, and global boundaries. And for me, the most interesting thing that came out of the TEDx experience was this sense of the power of not necessarily the events themselves, but this shared values of the global community, and how they really did have this sense of shared values. And so towards the end of my tenure at TED, what really became very self-evident is that events were not just enough. These were people that were working deep in the community, and what they really craved was to take action under the TED brand and really drive change in their communities. And so I moved on, and I went to work for a company in the Valley whose focus was on how technology solves all mankind's problems. And I looked at it as an experiment to see if I could take this volunteer platform that I built and rebuild it, but in a decentralized way, also take for-profit entities and layer it on top and allow the for-profit entities to help sustain the volunteer model, because the volunteer model in itself was not sustainable in the TEDx framework. And so this model actually worked. It worked very well, but what I really discovered along the way is that I didn't really share the values of the organization, but more importantly, something personal and something centered on communities and on humanity was really missing from the organization I was building it for. So I then stepped back, and as you all know, and as I said, the world is changing so radically, and it's not just technological change, social political change and geopolitical change, and there's a change in our structures and our economic systems. And so I ask, how can our organizations and institutions adapt and thrive in a future that looks absolutely nothing like our past? And how can we as humanity adapt and thrive in this future? And so I've spent the past year working with a bunch of people that have been along this journey with me on working through a new organization that is both for profit and for impact. And we launched it 4 months ago. The name of the organization is Boma. Boma in ancient Africa was a place where the community would come together to have their hard conversations and discuss how they can take action. And what Boma really is a global network of local partners offering transformational learning experiences. Now, it's a systems change model, which isn't easy to understand, but the best way to understand it is that imagine if the World Economic Forum was started simultaneously in 20 countries and was focused on impact and an open source learning model. And so we launched, as I said, about 4 months ago. We launched in 3 countries. We added 3 more countries this month, and we're hoping to be in 10 countries by the end of the year. And so what does Boma do? Boma is both deeply local and global. It is multidisciplinary. We sort of work at the intersection of technology, science, ethics, art, and wellness, and how do we design a more intentional and intelligent future with humanity at the center of it. We are multi-stakeholder. No change can happen unless we bring all stakeholders along with us. And so what we're doing initially at the beginning is we're doing in every country a large conference that's focused on this intersection. We're picking one big global challenge, and in every country we will tackle one of those global challenges through a large impact conference. And we also have our own bespoke corporate transformational products where we're going into companies and working with them on how to be more courageous leaders and how to think about the future so that they're responsible citizens on this planet. We have Boma principles, and I will leave you to read those. And most importantly, we have an extraordinary Boma brain trust. These extraordinary people are on this journey with us, and they're really there to help us think through our strategy, reset our compass, and reset our compass again. And so I would like to invite you all now to join Boma, and let's build a better future together. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mateen Syed. I have been a permanent fixture at TiEcon for the last 18 years. I've been running the ops and other programs as chair. This is a rare privilege for me to be sitting next to Lara, who has created a phenomenon, if I may say so. And I'm equally grateful to Asha and the Motwani Jadeja Foundation fellows who have done an incredible job putting this great track together. So having said that, Lara, I've been talking to people, and we knew that you were going to come here. The one word that stood out for all of us is phenomenon. So when you started TEDx as an experiment, I don't think anyone would have thought the shape it has taken. The question for us to learn is, because we are a volunteer-driven organization ourselves, and how do we keep people connected to the spirit of the organization and grow globally and be sustainable? That's a rare achievement. So it'll be good to learn from you.
Yes, so I really, having now built, this will be the 3rd global platform that I'm building, it is virtually impossible to have a volunteer model that is sustainable. What ends up happening is that the people that are in it at the very beginning will stay in it for a period of time, but it's hard to sustain that interest and that commitment over time. And so the unfortunate thing is you do lose a lot of institutional knowledge as people move on and hand it over to other people. Within the TEDx framework, we came upon that very early, especially on university campuses, because if you think, there were a lot of TEDx events. The very first TEDx event happened at TEDx USC on the USC campus, and that happened through the Stevens School of Learning, but the majority of TEDx events were completely student-run, and so when that four-year class moved on, that team of people that had all that institutional knowledge also moved on. Some of them went on to do other TEDx events. One of them actually did a TEDx event in a prison, so they did go on to use that knowledge elsewhere, but over a period of time, many of them transitioned out, and this is the 10-year anniversary of TEDx, so I think a lot of the people that are still that were in the early days, are sort of using this as a pivotal moment to move on.
The other interesting thing is empowering people across the globe through all these countries, people who probably don't have a good 2 square meals a day to eat, but they are trying to empower them also. You provide the platform. Wanted to learn from your experience. When you empower people, you provide the technology platform, you give them a voice. How has that experience been?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that TEDx didn't take up with the same kind of traction in all parts of the world. And to your point, in places of the world where people are trying to figure out where their next meal is coming from, it's not an automatic thing that they're going to do a TEDx event, right? And so you have to be more intentional about it. And so what I landed up doing with TEDx is I went to the Gates Foundation, and they landed up funding a program where we could bring leaders from from Africa and the developing world to TED to enable them that exposure, because you couldn't do a big TEDx event unless you'd been to TED. And that sort of jump-started the movement in parts of the world that it may not have taken traction in if it hadn't have been for the funding of the Gates Foundation.
So we come to your new gig, which is the Boma. You started, you said 4 months ago, you're inviting people to join that. There are a lot of touchy political issues across the world. And what happens with technology is it cuts both ways. When you invite people to join this new movement, how do we keep that frame of mind and try to then empower people around the globe?
So we're building it as a decentralized series of for-profit and non-profit partners. And our for-profit partners are all intellectuals and entrepreneurs who have been doing this for at least 15 to 20 years. They have communities around them that are aligned. And most importantly, in each country, we're building a brain trust. So thought leaders in those countries that can deeply tackle some of the deeply local global issues. So for example, I used that one slide with the genetically engineered twins. In that moment of CRISPR, it opened it up to a global conversation that we should have had in real time, not just from an American point of view, or a Chinese point of view, or a Brazilian point of view, but really with all of the different global stakeholders at the table and with recommended outcomes. And we sort of missed that opportunity. I mean, it was happening deep in a few think tanks, but nothing really got out to the global consciousness, right? And so what we're trying to do is build this very decentralized organization that is thoughtful and intelligent about how we design a future that's moving very quickly and that is very emergent, that a lot of our big organizations that are meant to be making these decisions can't even keep up, like the UN and other bodies.
I come to the subject of women empowerment, women in technology, women in leadership. We have the whole spectrum of women who just don't have access or are prevented from getting basic education, all the way to the other end where women say, look, don't separate us as women. We are equal and better. So in that spectrum, as a woman and a leader, how do you think we can be inclusive in the growth, competing against all kinds of forces?
It's a very complicated issue, and I'm on a board that tackles it from legal perspectives, and I've ran Women's March, the global part, so I've tackled it from a community perspective. It's a very, very difficult perspective, but I will say that nothing will happen unless it's deliberate. So unless we agree that 50% of women are going to be on boards and 50% of women are going to be in our workforce, it's not going to happen. And the reality is that all the data says that if you have a more diverse workforce and if you put women on your boards and if you have women in your organizations, better decisions get made, it increases revenue and increases the impact of and makes the company a richer, more successful company in all regards. And so I think we should look at the data and then make changes that are necessary to make sure that we have 50% of women representative in every circle of life.
So we'll open up for the audience for the Q&A because of the last few minutes remaining with Lara. So this is the opportunity for you to line up. I think we have a microphone here if you have Q&A. And those who are interested to ask a question is right in the center aisle. Please. Come in the middle aisle, please. You can pick up the microphone.
What kind of decentralization tools are you providing to enable the Boma platform?
So the very essence of Boma is that it's an emergent learning open source platform, and we're structuring it in a way that in the for-profit part of Boma, anything that's innovated in the local ecosystems go back onto the global platform. But we're also providing tools that we are developing, like the bespoke Boma curriculum for corporates, that where you can take it into corporates and work with them on how to be more courageous leaders and how to drive the world in a different kind of way. All that curriculum will be open to the Boma partners and be in what we're calling the Boma Commons.
Does the government have a stake in this? It seems like a very global viewpoint to issues, the World Economic Forum issues, or sustainable development goals. So is that in the roadmap somewhere, like collaboration?
The SDGs specifically?
Yeah, it seems like.
Yeah, so our non-profit organization, we will use the SDGs as scaffolding.
Okay.
When you talk about solving some of the world's biggest problems, you can't talk about them without the framework of the SDGs. Everybody uses it as a framework right now, and most certainly if you're looking for funding, it's a good way to at least hook into different pieces of funding. And so everything we do in both the non-profit and the for-profit is focused on impact and how do we drive and solve some of these big questions. And that's all hung on the SDG framework.
And I'm guessing privacy is taken care of as well? Privacy.
All right, so can we get, I want to give the opportunity to other.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much.
All right, so I thought I saw a hand there. That's why I stopped. Please.
Jack. Hello, Jack. Long time.
First, congrats on everything you did with TEDx. Congrats on the new Boma. My question, going back to the TEDx phenomenon that you created, TEDx obviously filled met a huge need that literally millions of people around the world have. And what was missing specifically in the traditional civil institutions in different regions of the world that TEDx really came in and filled? In other words, it was so clear from the success of TEDx that clearly there was something that people were burning for, hungering for. I've been to so many TEDx's, and you see the passion of the local people organizing year after year. It becomes their thing year after year to organize it. What was missing in that context that TEDx really helped to bring in?
Well, I think there are two answers. On a very personal level, I think it was at a time when people were engaging more and more in technology, but they were craving more and more the ability to get together as humanity and make human connections like this in person. And so definitely, it solved that function within the world. In countries where freedom of speech, where they didn't have freedom of speech, it also, because TED's, taught itself to be non-partisan and non-political, it gave people a platform to tell their story. So we had a TEDx event in Ramallah. We had a TEDx event, in a lot of the, Arab countries like Iran and Iraq that were very closed. And we did have problems. Like in Sudan, one of the events was they shut off all the electricity at one point, and another time they complained they didn't have the right permitting. So the government still tried, but because of the perception that this was a non-political platform, it was allowed to exist as a way to get ideas out there. And I think in those environments, as long as you stayed away from ideas, it was okay. I remember very early on, there was a TEDx event in Saudi Arabia, and the men and the women were standing on two different stages. And I sort of had a moment where I saw a tweet and I freaked out. And then I thought, well, at least it's happening. At least it's being allowed to exist in a part of the world where women would not normally get up on a stage and tell their story, right? And so we also had to adapt it a little bit based on the local cultural nuances and what was expected and needed.
Okay, please.
Thank you for doing this. I wanted to know how you're partnering with people who have a lot of environmental knowledge, like Greenpeace, EDF, and NRDC, and others.
So we're very early into this, and we are tackling some of the, so my New Zealand partner just did an event on the future of food and food security. And in that ecosystem, she brought in all the stakeholders. So everybody that needed to be in that conversation was in that conversation. As we start to do, and most certainly once we have 10 to 20 country partners in the ecosystem, we will start to do bigger global events, and we will partner with everybody we need to partner with to have the kinds of conversations we need to have.
Please.
Hi, Lara.
You can use it, yeah, pick it up. Thanks.
Hi, Lara. You speak about global empowerment, which is wonderful. Yet if you read the book Why Nations Fail, for most of human history and in most places on the planet, leaders have a tendency to try to accumulate both economic and political power for themselves at the expense of the people in the region. Are you going to be somehow trying to address this issue with Boma?
So I think all the tension we're feeling in the world right now is at the epicenter of that. The world is structured as a top-down patriarchal structure that tries to hold on to power, and everything we're seeing right now with the open source movement and with blockchain and with involves the opening up. And so there's this fundamental tension between empowering the crowd and empowering the crowd more and more through technology, and then the sort of top-down system of governance and government and holding on to the power structures. And so we're building Boma in a way that we will empower the crowd, and we will embrace the ability for them to find the innovation and also drive the impact, while at the same time creating these decentralized for-profit organizations all over the world that will work in this blended ecosystem together. So I don't know if that exactly answered your question, but I think there's a lot of tension between those two models right now.
I think we are almost at the end. I have one last question since you mentioned about patriarchal structures. Most organizations, especially nonprofits, we struggle with breaking down those mental barriers of mostly men. And you have been doing an amazing job. It's good to learn. How do we going about, breaking down a mindset of the strong structures of patriarchy?
So again, you can look at the data, and you can see that any time that you embrace diversity, you're going to be a better organization for it. That's number one. And then it takes leadership at the top, and it's why we're tackling a big part of what we're doing with Boma is how do we work with leaders to be different kinds of leaders and to be more courageous and to think differently and to understand diversity is important and understand the role they have to play moving into the future that is such a very, very complicated, fast-changing place. So, I think everything should be half men, half women in this world, and we just should respect each other, and this world would be a better place.
All right, on that note, again, it's a pleasure, Lara. Thank you so much for the opportunity.